You're welcome. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Faisal Hussain. I'm the Managing Director for Minhaj Welfare Foundation. I just wanted to send a message out to all the Minhaj Welfare Foundation volunteers working worldwide under these unprecedented circumstances. Since the crises turned into lockdowns throughout the whole world, our volunteers have been relentlessly working out on the field providing aid to vulnerable, isolated, elderly and vulnerable people. Throughout this process, Minhaj Welfare Foundation has taken extensive care in making sure we're available and accessible to the vulnerable communities throughout the West. In the meantime, while the lockdown and the crisis is now spreading out into the third world, we're extremely concerned about their welfare. A lot of people in the third world will not have access to government stimulus. A lot of them will not be able to be compensated for the loss of earnings. And I would say up to 50% in some nations are daily wagers. They live on a day-to-day basis. I'm really concerned about these individuals. I'm really concerned about the crisis that's going to unfold once the lockdown comes over, because they would not have enough means to live, sustain their families. So we've launched our crisis appeal. We urge everybody to visit minhajwelfare.org and support our crisis appeal, especially for all the daily wagers who will not be able to survive more than a few days without their wages and their compensation. Our aim is to try and get as many food packs to them so that they can sustain their families for a month. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see you this year. We will not be able to see you because mosques have stopped congregations. We'll not be able to see you because we've had to cancel all our fundraising events. All the traditional means of getting to you, getting the message of these poor communities across to you and encouraging you to donate are not applicable this year. So the only means are call us at 0300 3030 777 or visit our website minhajwelfare.org and donate online. Regardless of whatever the situations we're going through, we must consider the plight that people in the third world are going to be going through. In this difficult and desperate time, let's remember the poor and needy. Assalamu alaikum, look after yourself and be careful.
What's up? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, and thank you for joining us today for tonight's discussion. We are live on Minhajul Quran International UK. For those of you who are aware of what Minhajul Quran International UK is, Minhajul Quran International UK is a branch of an international organization that covers over 90 countries of the world, working to revive the prophetic teachings of the Ummah through spiritual, moral, political and economic endeavors. It is founded by Shaykh al-Islam Dr. Muhammad Tahir al-Qadri. But before we start today's discussion, I'd like to say a few words. We are amidst a pandemic, a COVID-19 pandemic. Here and life has completely changed. It is nothing is the same. And we are living something that many of us have never witnessed. And in all of this, we are trying to come together, unite, and work to tackle this pandemic. And before I move on, I would like to pay tribute to those National Health Service workers and those around the world who are working right now to protect the lives of so many people. And in that, also remember those that have sadly lost their lives in this pandemic. In that, I want to remember Dr. Al-Taabi, Dr. Amjad Al-Hawarani, Dr. Adil Al-Tiyar, Dr. Habib, and the 38-year-old nurse, Arima, who sadly lost their lives whilst fighting on the front line to save the lives of those people in this country. COVID-19 right now is affecting all of our families, all of our communities around the globe, and we must all play a part to prevent it from taking heed. And in this show today, our purpose is to talk about the precautionary measures, both from a medical perspective but also from an Islamic perspective. And that's why I am proud and glad to be here joined by an esteemed panel of guests. Firstly, we have Dr. Adil Iqbal, who is an acute medical consultant, an MRCP tutor, and a departmental lead for medical education at the NHS Medway Maritime Hospital. He has a first-hand experience in dealing with COVID-19 patients. He is a facilitator and an academic speaker for two of the world's largest global pharmaceuticals and sits on numerous boards, including being the founder of an international education fund at Imperial College London. We also have with us Dr. Zaid Iqbal, who is a practicing consultant in occupational medicine. He has specialized in occupational medicine for numerous years, which included the study of epidemiology of work-related diseases. He's also involved in the Mayor of London's, he was also involved actually in the Mayor of London's multi-agency pandemic contingency planning during the 2009 swine flu pandemic. And last but not least, we have Mufti Sohail Ahmed Siddiqui Saab, who is the head of Islamic Sciences at Minhaj College, Manchester. Mufti Sohail has studied at Jamia Islamia Minhaj al-Quran and the Minhaj University in Lahore, Pakistan, where under the tutelage of Shaykh al-Islam Dr. Muhammad Tahir al-Qadri, he received a wealth of classical and traditional Islamic knowledge from learned scholars. As I mentioned earlier, the purpose of the show today is to highlight the need for precaution and how we can come out of this pandemic in a safe way, not just for ourselves, but in a way for our families, for our communities, and for those around us. So thank you for those that are joining us today. But let's start the discussion talking about COVID-19 and what is COVID-19? What is coronavirus? Because many people have said coronavirus has always existed. So coming to you, Dr. Zaid, what is coronavirus? Has it just come about now? Or is it something that's been in place? Or is it a virus that's been there for a while?
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum. Coronavirus has existed for a long time. In fact, the common cold is caused by a coronavirus. It's caused by other viruses as well. Percent of common colds are caused by a form of coronavirus. This particular form of coronavirus that we're calling COVID, or it's actually now called SARS-CoV-2, is a novel coronavirus. In other words, it's relatively new. Well, it's very new actually, and that presents problems because, unlike with other coronaviruses or even the flu virus, for example, the human population doesn't seem to have, well, it doesn't have immunity to it, and that's why it's wreaking such havoc across the globe. It's thought that the coronavirus or the COVID-19 has actually originated in bats, in the same way as SARS virus originated from bats. There was a SARS epidemic in 2003, people may remember, and then a few years back there was a MERS epidemic. That's another coronavirus, which is thought to have jumped from bats to camels and then to humans. So this particular form of coronavirus, the COVID-19 as it was called, or now called the SARS-CoV-2, because it shares many of its genetic characteristics with that previous SARS virus. About 80% of its genetic material is similar or the same as the SARS virus. And because it's quite new, there's the research on it is ongoing. But a lot of the stuff that is now put into place is based on our knowledge of the SARS virus. So COVID just basically means coronavirus disease 19. So that's basically what the coronavirus is. I mean, it's particularly dangerous, as I said, because people aren't immune to it, but it's also quite contagious. So
but it's not a common cold as many people thought it would just be a common cold, majority of people would get it, you could form this kind of herd immunity and it would all be over. it seems to be far more severe than that.
Oh yes, I mean there are two aspects to it. Firstly, it's very contagious compared to, let's say, the flu. So somebody with the flu, they might pass the flu on to. It has say 1 to 2 people essentially. For example, the coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2, one person can pass it up to 3 people. So you can see it's much more infectious, but it's also seems to be much more dangerous because it seems to be causing major illness, particularly those who are vulnerable in the same way that flu was, older people with underlying health issues. But we seem to be getting more and more reports of younger people becoming infected and actually dying from it. So it seems to be much more dangerous. Well, it's certainly much more dangerous than the common cold, but it's also seems to be much more dangerous than the flu. So it's not just like the common cold, and it's not just
the common cold or the flu. But bringing you in, Dr. Adil, look, we heard a few weeks ago, the idea was, I think, from the chief scientist and the chief medical officer, there were information that we were forming this kind of strategy for herd immunity in this country, whilst other countries were going into lockdown and different strategies were being used. Be used for this COVID-19, and can this be a strategy to take us out of it?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. If you'd be kind enough just to allow me to preface my answer, I want to begin by saying what a pleasure it is to be hosted by you, Mubin, and to share this digital platform with His Eminence Sheikh Mohammed Sohail Siddiqui Sahib and Dr. Zahid Iqbal. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I also join you in sending condolences to my NHS colleagues and indeed anybody who has lost a loved one to this horrible disease. The heartache is magnified because we know that family can't attend funerals. There's so many barriers and so many difficulties that are unprecedented. I also want to extend condolences to Amy O'Rourke, another young nurse, and Thomas Harvey, another young nurse who've also passed away. And I wish a speedy recovery to all my colleagues who are currently affected by this, some of them intubated and ventilated at the moment. And indeed, anybody out there who's being treated, I do hope you a speedy recovery. Now, coming on to your question, I want to answer the question by saying how proud I am to be in a nation forefront of this disease. We know that this country is full of brilliant minds, epidemiologists, medics, doctors and researchers, and Imperial College has led the way for the world in helping with a strategy. Now, due to the novelty that was alluded to by Dr. Zahid Iqbal, there is no clear-cut strategy in place at the moment. There are a lot of trials, there are a lot of different methods that we're dealing with this pandemic. Some of it is through looking at whether herd immunity will take place or not. Some of it is through the institution of vaccinations, and some of it is through drugs. So I think it's about watching this space and seeing the multifaceted approach to see where we go next.
And so the argument is, I think, something developing on what Dr. Zaid said. The one thing that we do know about this disease is it spreads like no other. It spreads between individuals very sharply, if I'm correct in saying that, Dr. Deal.
Absolutely. It's an incredibly infectious virus, and that's why across the world, and I'm proud of the countries, especially in the Muslim world, how quickly they've reacted to something like this, including the Haramain Sharifain, where, with very little cases at that time, had taken such an audacious step to help mitigate the risk of transmission.
And it's with the scientific evidence, Dr. Adil and Dr. Zaid, that you've provided. I want to move on to Mufti Sohail Ahmed Siddiqui Saab. There's a plethora of evidence showing that this disease spreads vehemently through people, spreads in congregations. So Mufti Sohail, was it right for the Haram to be suspended on these occasions? Was it right for masajid around the country and around the globe to suspend their Jummah prayers and to suspend congregations? And is this something from an Islamic perspective, or did we do something that was against our own Islamic fundamentals and principles?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you all for having me here. As to your question, it is all right. It is perfect in lines of the directions given by our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there is nothing against them in this. It's perfectly all right. Actually, in the situation that we are seeing today, we see today, it is not just okay. Our understanding is that it is more like an obligation. From religious viewpoint, it's more like an obligation because there are clear commandments of isolation in such situations that we have from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's not just a permission here; it's more like an obligation.
And many would say that the masajid should stay open. If this is our destiny, if we are destined to receive this, then we shouldn't fear coronavirus. And I know this isn't a position that many hold within the UK at this moment in time, but there are certain countries in the world, and there are certain Islamic scholars saying, well, a very minute amount, may I say, are saying, well, if this is our destiny, then we must, if we're going to get this, then you know what, if we're destined to get it, then that is destiny.
Actually, that is an academic misunderstanding, I would say. There are two aspects to things like this, or not only this, any other thing like this, or there are other things which don't seem to be like this. One of the point is that the part of our aqidah as a Muslim is that nothing can happen unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands it to be. And point number two is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set a system in this world. This is the system known as cause and effect. Allah has created causes and Allah has created effects in them. Now those causes basically are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He has made a system, and those causes do have the effect. Why? Because Allah has commanded them to have that effect. So when it comes from any certain or particular cause or particular source, it is with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But one thing in this that we should know, that even if that cause, like if you have a medicine, for example, we'll just take simple paracetamol, it has an effect. It will reduce your pain. So this is Allah's permission for this to do that. And this is known as the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has established a system where there is a cause and there is an effect. But still, if Allah does not want it to work, it will not work. So we have two things together, and we have to have a very perfect balance in the both between these two. So first thing, that whatever comes to us, that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if He doesn't command a certain thing to come to us, it will not come whatsoever. So we can see people, so a lot of time people live with among the people, when there is an epidemic, not everybody doesn't die. So that is the one aspect, that nothing comes except with the command of Allah. Second aspect is that Allah has created a system. So is there any system of precaution for that in light of that system? Yes, there is. So we have to take care of both at the same time. So a lot of people get confused because of this, lack of understanding of these, or lack of appreciation of these 2 points together. So we have to take them together in our consideration. So what we are doing is following the system Allah has created. Allah has created a virus, and He has given it an ability to cause us harm. And in that light, Allah has commanded us to take care of precautions. We have to be like, if this person is the source of it, then I'm commanded to avoid it. Give you another example. If there is a poison, what will it do? It will give you death. But are we allowed to take it just because to show that if Allah doesn't want it? Well, Allah wants it to do it. It's very simple. Allah wants it to do it. Yes, He can still stop it, but that's not the ruling for every poison. So when this is not the ruling for every poison, so we need to take precaution about it. We don't want to come near it. So that is the misunderstanding lies in the lack of appreciation of 2 points together. We take full precautions, that is a commandment. And after that precaution, when we just say we go into isolation, does that mean that we believe that it can never come to me? If Allah wanted, it will. If he doesn't want it, it won't. But my responsibility was to go into isolation. I've done that. That's my responsibility. So we have to take both in consideration and create a balance between the both. So those who don't take that balance, they go either this way or that way. That is a problem.
Can we see this from the prophetic teachings? Is this something that was done by earlier generations? Is this something that we can find in hadith that backs up this idea that we go into isolation and we should protect ourselves in these ways?
Basic principle comes from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. Don't put yourself to ruin with your own hands. That's the basic principle. We are not allowed to get ourselves into trouble. We are not there. We don't call for trouble, but we are ready for the trouble. But the basic principle comes from the Quran. We don't call for any trouble. Now, if this is clear, then in light of this, hadith will also come. That's natural. And in light of this, even if there was no hadith, in light of Quran, scholars would give some directions. So when there is Quran there, we don't need anything else. But Holy Prophet ﷺ, because one of his duties as a prophet is to explain what Quran says. So he has told us in one hadith, Holy Prophet ﷺ, in this situation, anything like this happens, there is a disease which will come to you from other people, or either you have and it will go to others, or some other people have and it will come to you. Then Holy Prophet ﷺ has told us to stay alone in our homes. Just lock yourself in. And if you remain in your home, and if still comes to you, now I give you two possibilities. One, it wasn't with you and you got into isolation. Number two, it was with you and you got into isolation. If you go into isolation because it was with you and you take your precautions to make it better for yourself, but it still doesn't get better, still you will have, and you die, you will get the reward of shaheed, a martyr. Now in the second situation, you didn't have it, but so you kept yourself safe from others. But Allah wanted it, so maybe through airborne or whatever way, it came to you. And still, because of that, you still get the reward of a martyr. So either way, the principle laid down is that you go into isolation. So that is the directions given by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Thank you for that. And Mufti Sahel kind of alluded to it. Is this question that is this disease airborne? Is it something that you can get by just walking outside? Dr. Zaid, if you can come in there. Is it airborne? Can we just get it from walking outside?
Sorry, before you say that, I didn't say this is that kind. I just gave an example.
No, I'm moving the example on.
I just wanted to clear on myself.
Yeah, there are basically two, you could say, modes of transmission. One is direct, and it's not airborne as such. It's basically through droplets that are issued from a person who's infected, either from a coughing or sneezing. So these can travel up to, say, 2 meters, which is why we've got this social distancing rule, not to be within somebody else, not to be within 6 feet or 2 meters of them. The other mode of transmission is indirectly from surfaces that are contaminated with the virus. So if people sneeze or cough, that virus through those tiny droplets, it rests on surfaces in the environment, and as we go around the environment, we might touch those particular surfaces, and if we then contaminate our hands through touching, and then we touch our face, there's a danger that the virus will enter through either the nose, the mouth, or the eyes and infect you. So that's basically the two main modes of infection. It's not shown to be airborne. So there are viruses that are airborne. Measles, for example. I mean, that's very, very contagious because these stick around in the air for quite a long time. But as far as this virus is concerned, the spread isn't airborne. It's actually through droplets, as I said, through sneezing or coughing, or through touching surfaces. And the way that you get the virus is basically through your mucous membranes, through your mouth, through your nose, by contamination of your hands. Which is why the precautions are to keep washing your hands, as often as you can, for 20 seconds at least, using detergent, or or using the alcohol-based cleansing. What are they called now? Cleansing fluids, or hand sanitizers. But also to the social distancing as well, is to basically make sure that you, this is a directive now from the government, is that you stay at home. Like, everyone stays at home in your own house, in your own household, to reduce personal contact, that you only go out if it's absolutely necessary to get food or supplies, that you don't go out to work unless it's absolutely essential, work from home. So these are the measures that have been put in place to try and one person infects, say, on average 0.6 people. So 100 people will then infect 60 people. Those 60 people will then potentially infect 40 people, and 40 people, whatever 0.6 of 40 years, will infect. So you can see that the effect or the impact of social distancing is there to help reduce the transmission. And hopefully by the end of this process, as Dr. Adil said, there may be a vaccine which will be produced.
Dr. Zaid, and I want to ask you about vaccines in a short while.
Yeah.
You're talking about, for example, social distancing. How are people meant to be socially distant for? How long will this go on for? Is it actually working? Because the idea is, at the moment, social distancing just prevents the overload on the National Health Service, on those people who are helping those in ICUs and those who have severe effects of it. But in the end, will we have to relax the rules to go back into social distancing yet again for a second peak?
Well, that is the question. I think nobody really knows for sure. At some stage, once the infection rate goes down or starts to plateau and go down, once the death rate starts to go down, then the government may start to relax these social distancing measures, maybe gradually on a stepwise basis. But yes, there's always the danger of a second wave. And I suppose that was the point of the herd immunity theory, was that if, say, 80% of the population got it, then you would safeguard the rest of society from getting it. But if people aren't getting it, then as people start going about their own business, there is going to be less than, say, 80% of people with it, and therefore the society will be susceptible to potentially a second wave, which is why I think it would be important, perhaps, and Dr. Deal may want to.
Dr. Deal, do you want to come in here?
Come in on this, on the issue of the importance of something like a vaccine to be developed to counteract this.
Well, absolutely. As we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work going on. If I may just talk about the UK for now. We have got a clinical trial running, which is an Oxford-led initiative. It's one of the largest trials in the world for this condition. It's called the Recovery Trial. Now, I know we're very short of time, so I won't go into details. The study design is a very interesting one, especially we live in an evidence-based medicine era, but it's a relatively agile trial. There are 5 arms in which patients are enrolled. So they can have standard of care, which is no additional treatment apart from supportive measures such as oxygen therapy, etc. Or there are a series of drugs. One of them is ritonavir and lopinavir, which is a HIV drug. One of them that you've probably heard a lot about in the media is hydroxychloroquine. And then there's an inhaled medicine called interferon. And in addition to that, there's a steroid component to the trial as well. Now, in the wider trials, not in this country, but there's an interleukin-6 receptor antagonist drug that's being used as well. And what we're looking at is to see whether any of these can reduce the viral load in the patient. At the same time, vaccines being developed. Now, people are saying the pandemic is here and now. Why aren't the scientists giving us a clear answer? Because it's not simply just to find a drug that works. You then have to make sure that that drug is safe, You then have to make sure that the dosaging is appropriate and correct. So there's a lot of things that go into these trials, but the rate at which this trial is working at is unprecedented. The trial was put together in a record 9 days. And it has become the largest in the world, so it's very interesting. In Germany, they're using convalescent plasma. That's taking the blood of patients who are already infected and injecting that to use the preformed antibodies against the novel coronavirus to see if that's working. So there's a lot of work that's going on contemporaneously, but that's in the scientific domain. But I fully agree with what was outlined by Dr. Zahid, reinforcing the government advice to keep as distant as possible.
But you mentioned social distancing is probably the only thing we can do right now with this pandemic, especially because we haven't actually got a vaccine. But what we're seeing is, and we alluded to it at the very start, it's a sad time. With thousands of people around the world losing their lives. Sadly, 700 and I think 8 people across the UK lost their lives in the last 24 hours. And as a discussion that's happened within the Muslim community, there is a vast majority of those also, a huge number of them, say, who are from Muslim communities. And as you know, it's a very sensitive issue for everybody, for those in faith communities where the afterlife is something which is sanctimonious, which is very, is very meaningful. Those final religious rituals and obligations are very emotionally, spiritually, and religiously important for many families and many believers across the UK. So you mentioned social distancing. Does this distancing apply for those that sadly lose their life? Does the virus go away for those who are deceased, sadly deceased in this issue, Dr. Adil?
I think it's a very important question. There are 2 questions that you mentioned. I'd like to briefly answer the first one and then move on to this concept of deceased patients who are COVID positive. There's something more we can do than social distancing, and this is now coming from clinical experience. We are told if you have symptoms, isolate and stay isolated, but you need to be aware of your symptoms and their progression. The disease, in its more lethal forms, behaves very aggressively in the lungs. So small symptoms that you would otherwise overlook can actually lead you to develop a very poor prognosis if you don't seek medical help. One of the things that we're incredibly concerned about is a symptom of shortness of breath. It may well be subtle. It might be that you're not able to complete your sentences as effectively as you could before. It might be that you're feeling a bit short of breath on a normal walk up the stairs. These are symptoms where you must consult medical advice. I have seen patients, and it's the first time in my clinical experience, and indeed my colleagues, my consultant colleagues as well, where people are sitting at home with incredibly low oxygen saturations when they're measured. And within days, and in some cases hours, these patients are walking into hospitals and then ending up on a ventilator. So not only should we be socially distancing and isolating, but we should be monitoring for symptom progression and then seeking appropriate help. Now coming to your second question about ghusl and deceased bodies. I am well aware of the government guidelines that are published, and I'm also aware of the Royal College of Pathologists guidelines, which state that well, actually, what they do state is they strongly advise, and I'm quoting verbatim, that we should not really be involved in the ritualistic washing of these bodies. They say there's a small but a real risk. Now, that's again a quotation from the guidelines, a real risk of transmission of COVID-19 to those performing the activities. I know in this country that there's heterogeneity between mosques about washing of the bodies. Some scholars are advocating that we should not be washing the bodies. Some are advocating that you should perform a form of tayammum over the body bag. Others are advocating that what we should be doing is actually taking the body out, giving the full reverence, and actually washing the deceased in full detail. Now, of the guidelines and the government's recommendation that if you are going to do this, PPE should be worn. And in fact, the PPE that they advise is a simple fluid-resistant surgical mask rather than the FFP3 mask. And we can talk about those if we need to clarify what that all means, as well as gloves, aprons, etc. It's not only comment on the Islamic position, but certainly I will comment on the medical position. I have discussed this because of the gravity of the situation. And I'm not talking about this from some abstract position. I've got family members currently intubated and ventilated, very, very ill. And I'm thinking about the consequences of this. And I myself am at risk as a frontline worker. I have discussed this with very eminent authorities in pathology, in those who perform postmortem at Oxford, Professor Ian Roberts, who is very well aware of our religious sentiments because he's one of the innovators of minimally invasive autopsy in this country, having worked with the Jewish community and the Muslim community. And I've spoken to him about how the virus behaves post-mortem. I've also spoken to one of the former UK government pathologists who's performed thousands of the most complicated autopsies, including those of aircraft investigations. And he's worked with the armed forces. And again, he's got one of the most brilliant careers in this field. And his advice is that we don't really know how the virus behaves post-mortem. We do know that it can survive on surfaces. So therefore, if you are going to be performing, how well are you sanitizing your surfaces? You don't know. For me, why do I take such a strong position and advocate that we should not be doing this? Is because I'm about risk mitigation, reducing viral transmission, and protecting the public. The reality is that the people who are going to be washing the bodies are very good-hearted people who are trying to uphold this religious duty, and they may well not be trained in how to use PPE. You know, and when you open the bag, there is a theoretical risk, and I've discussed this with the experts, that there can be some virus particles which actually come into the air as well. And a fluid-resistant surgical mask is not going to offer you much protection there. And an FFP3 mask, if you are able to get it, should only be used when it's fit tested. And that is in itself is a full procedure. So I take a very strong position that protects the public. You know, I've got...
Bring Mufti Suhail in there. What are you saying? And I think my reading of the guidance is no guidance is ever going to tell you don't perform ghusl. It's a very it's something that's religious. It's quite sensitive. But what you're saying is the guidance inadvertently says that this is a huge risk. Is this what you are saying, Adil?
I am.
That this is a huge risk. Now, taking that medical and that scientific evidence on board, I want to come to Mufti Suhail because, and I'll come back to you, Dr. Adil, if that's okay. I'll just head to Mufti Suhail because there's two aspects. The purpose of this show is to bring together that scientific evidence that we need to understand what this disease is, but to bring that with our Islamic jurisprudence, Islamic theology, Islamic perspective, and see how can we navigate through this pandemic where we can, you know, prevent people from losing their lives, but also uphold our religious obligations as British Muslims. So I'm going to come to you, Mufti Suhail. The experts are saying that there's a clear risk here for ghusl. The evidence is showing that. The guidance is kind of preventing that quite clearly. What do we do from an Islamic perspective in this situation?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I've given you the basic principle right in the beginning, that you don't put yourself to ruin or to, the word is halak. Halak is just perishing, finishing off, or ruining, all other meanings of the word halak. So don't put yourself to halak with your own very hands. And that principle will apply all the way in all these situations. So if more than 50% is the possibility of getting, how do you say, infected, if this possibility of getting infected, if you look at between, in terms of 1 to 10, is more than 5, then you're not allowed to do it.
Is this a jurisprudence?
If it is, yes. If it is, that is the possibility of your getting infected is more than 50%. So that is enough to pass a ruling on it. Am I clear on that? If the possibility of getting affected or getting in danger is more than 50%, then this knowledge, if it has come from purely academic and professional viewpoint, and they agree, and there is no second opinion on that, and they agree that the possibility of getting affected is more than 50%, then you don't proceed. Straightforward.
And so if you don't proceed, what will happen to these religious obligations of Muslims? What will happen to those that have lost their lives?
No, there are two obligations here. One obligation related to the dead one, the deceased one. One obligation towards those who live. If there is a clash between these two obligations, the obligation towards the alive, that takes precedence. I'll give you one example from this. If there is this lady and she is pregnant, and if they continue the pregnancy, one of the two will definitely die. If they are definite, more than 50%, then one of the two will definitely die if they don't do anything. Then the ruling goes that you protect the mother because she is alive in front of us and baby is not alive in front of us. So you protect the one that we see alive in front of us. So that is also an example of this this principle. Is that example clear? Does that clarify the point?
I'm going to come back. I want to go back to Dr.
Does that clarify the point?
That clarifies it from some perspectives, but there are questions.
It's an obligation towards the dead one, an obligation towards those who live. In that case, if there is clash, obligation towards those who live, that takes precedence, not to those who are already died.
That's fine. Can we come in with Dr. Adil here? Is there more than 50%? This 50% of needed to cancel this, to suspend it if needs be. Is that evidence relevant? Is it there? Is it clear cut?
Mobeen, I hope you'll allow me to expound rather than provide a yes or no answer.
Okay.
As the field experts have mentioned, we don't know how the virus behaves post-mortem, how it behaves in the dead body. We know the risk is there, but there's no quantification of that risk. However, we have to be incredibly aware that we're talking now about a pandemic condition. Dr. Zahid has already mentioned in detail that the transmission of this is logarithmic, so that when one person gets it, you're infecting many, many, many others. But I would also add that the people who are performing these rites and rituals are generally Muslims who live in families, bigger families. They have elderly people with them, so the transmission of that risk to those has to be factored into this equation rather than just taking a percentage value. But again, that's
let me explain my 50% thing. There is this a term or fuqaha have used. They use the word al-ilm al-shar'i. In order to proceed in a particular direction or pass a ruling, we need to have the knowledge which is called a legal knowledge about it, legally acceptable knowledge. The legally acceptable knowledge, I take the percentage off. It's more likely it will get affected. If this is the situation, then they are allowed to not wash it, and it can go without any proceedings of that kind of janaza. Is it clearer than before?
Yes.
There will be no sin if we don't give ghusl. May we take Allah's refuge from such situation, but there will be no sin.
Coming in there, I think Dr. Deals kind of alluded to this is a pandemic situation. It is a state of emergency. So
yes, let me say one more thing here. If it is a pandemic situation, actually I started from the principle so that the matter is clearer. Now, when it is a pandemic situation, then it's almost more than 90% it will come. It's not the question of 50% anymore. Am I right to assume that? It's more like it will come. That's, it's imminent. It is visible. It's like visible. So the ruling is clear now. Is that clear from my perspective? Is that clear from my perspective?
Yeah,
if you want to be clearer than that, then don't proceed.
Dr. Deal?
Yeah, I would say that I'm incredibly grateful to all those people who are advocating, wanting to do this ritual duty. I think their enthusiasm speaks volumes, but I think they can't just read a Royal College of Pathologists guidance and just take that small shard and infect somebody. That's a serious risk. I'm incredibly grateful for Mufti Said for saying what he said. I think that provides a lot of consolation. And I hope that as a Muslim community, we don't enter the debate of ghusl and deceased. But if we get PPE, we think that why don't we donate that to the frontline staff who are currently losing and risking their lives? That's just a suggestion. So I'm very grateful for the words of Mufti Muhammad Suhail Ahmed Siddiqui Said.
I've got a question in before I come to Dr. Zahid. Dr. Dew, if you can answer this. What percentages do we have of those who are losing their lives being from religious or ethnic backgrounds?
I'm afraid I don't have that statistic.
That's fine. Dr. Zaid, would you want to comment onto this debate about ghusl? Should ghusls take place? There is another stance which I'm going to bring Mufti Sahel in shortly, but some people have said, okay, it's not about opening the bag and doing the full ritual ghusl, but if we are just doing some kind of tayammum, if we're just wiping water over the bag, will PPE be needed in these conditions, or what is the kind of situation that Muslims can expect for this?
Well, if PPE is definitely needed if you're going to have contact. That's because, as Dr. Adil said, there is, as the Royal College of Pathologists says, there's a small but real risk of transmission. As far as a body bag is concerned, it depends really. It depends on but again, a body bag could still be contaminated. You see, the virus lives on surfaces, so it depends on how that deceased person came into the body bag in the first place. I mean, I think overall, if there is a significant risk, if even one person potentially could pass this on to another person, and that person dies, then why take that risk? Is my view. If the religious sanctioning is that it's not necessary in these particular exceptional circumstances, it's not going to be a sin, why do we really need to take that risk? Even if that risk is relatively small, but the fact is the risk might be small, but the outcome is catastrophic. And you're talking about the death of a person, or death of many persons through the actions of, say, ghusl or having hazardous contact with a diseased person.
Mufti Saab?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that one thing. Yes, I'll give you another aspect on that. Number one, there is no sin if we don't proceed ghusl and things related to that. But on the other hand, we have another aspect as well. And that is, if we know that this virus is going to come to us and may not affect me, but there may be many who will be affected after that, then proceeding will be a sinful act for this person who is doing it. Not doing will not be a sin, but knowing all that is happening, doing will be a sinful thing. Is that... Yeah,
your guidance is quite clear. Do not do it, because the evidence shows quite clearly, and it will be no sin. However, the sin will be if you do it and it does cause harm. But there's also some people who
no. It will be sin if you do it while knowing it does harm.
Okay.
Even it doesn't harm to you.
Yeah, it could harm. If it could harm,
it's more likely it will, and normally it does. It's the practice. Normally it does whatsoever. This is knowing things for experience, and that has a valid point and a valid position. Knowing things by experience. By experience, we know it does harm, and once you know it, now you go ahead risking yourself. Then it is an act of sin.
And Sahab, there are some people are saying that fair enough, we won't do the full ghusl, but we will find a middle way in this, a middle path, which means just wiping the cloth of the bag or doing some kind of tayammum on instead of the ghusl. How is this a middle way that actually works?
No, there are two things on it. Number one, to my information, I'm not aware of the masala of tayammum for dead body. It's not in my memory. There are certain situations where they give this directions. For example, if somebody dies and there is no mahram or somebody who can touch, etc. So I'm not, the whole thing is not in my mind at the moment. But my question will be different. The effect that will have if somebody goes for ghusl, why can't he have that if he goes for tayammum? What's the difference?
Dr. Dev, yes.
Because just let me get. Tayammum would mean that you touch the body, or maybe maximum with a item of clothing on your hand. No, that would mean that. So does that mean that the virus is not come to you? Will not come to you? I believe this is the same one and the same thing both way. No difference.
Dr. Dev.
Well, all of the experts that I've spoken to have said that there's a real risk of infection to the people who are performing the rituals. It's documented guidance as well. I think it'd be rather ironic, Mubin, that here we are, the Mataf, and doing all of these things that we've never seen in our lives. And we, as Muslims, I'm sure, felt very eerie when we saw that scene. And we're hoping that we weren't alive at a time when we had to see something like that. And if here we are trying to push for something like this that develops a cluster of infection, I personally think that would be unforgivable.
And you alluded to this earlier as well. You mentioned that there are frontline staff who have not got PPE material or are just about resourcing it at this moment in time. There's a whole political debate on this. I don't want to get into the political aspects, but if we are using this very scarce PPE equipment, especially the grade that is needed for ghusl, for those that have already sadly lost their lives, are we taking away from those that are going to lose their lives?
Well, the recommendation in the government document, to be fair, is a fluid-resistant surgical mask, which is widely available. Although I don't advocate it because I know that the Public Health of England have changed the guidance quite a few times on this. So it's not really a scientific, it's not really a rigorously scientific methodology. But I do agree that we should, as Muslims, or as a community rather, try to get as much of this PPE and give it to our local centres. I think that would be useful right now. The chief executive of 3M, the manufacturer of the gold standard FFP3 masks, has said that he does not want to see any of his masks ending up in stores but going directly to the hospitals in America. So I think that's something for us to be aware of. So if we're hunting for this equipment so we can perform this ritual and we've got frontline staff perishing, it's something that we've got to be aware of.
Well, Dr. Zaid, we've got a question. It's relating to coronavirus, as the topic is coronavirus.
Excuse me, just adding to that point, according to my understanding of the religion, in this situation, those who are fighting on front line, their life is more important than those who are going to perform these rituals. If we deprive them by taking these things, again, I'm clear on that, we shall be sinful.
Mufti Sahels gave a very clear perspective. Dr. I want to take your wording on what Mufti Sahels just said on this, but also a secondary question once you've come to that. Is this virus being spread by 5G? I know people are saying right now that it's the 5G masts that are transmitting this disease, and therefore it kind of goes away from a lot of the scientific evidence you were telling me about that comes due to contact, because if it was 5G, it could reach us in our homes, couldn't it?
You're asking me? I mean, that's just absolute rubbish. There's no connection between 5G, which is sort of electromagnetic radiation, and this, which is a virus. I mean, I can't really see any link between the two. I mean, I've heard some outlandish stories, but this probably takes the biscuit. Fake news, I would say.
You're not happy, are you, Dr. Zaid, here?
Well, look, there's a lot of, I think we need to be careful. There's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet, on Facebook, on various social media. I think people need to be careful where they take their information from and try to rely on sources that are reputable and reliable and accurate. I just think it's a shame, really, that there are people amongst us who just, are really into these conspiracy theories, which isn't helpful, actually, because if you're firstly, by spreading these rumors, you're scaring people. You're frightening people. You're making people anxious. You're increasing the level of anxiety in society, and secondly, a lot of these things that are being advocated, not just talking about 5G, but all sorts of other things, can be dangerous. So, my advice is take your news, take your information from reputable sources that are scientifically validated, that have scientific backing. But there's absolutely no scientific, there's no plausible link between 5G antennae and electromagnetic radiation and this virus. There's absolutely, I can't even think of why they've even made that link.
Yeah, and there's a religious point on this, but I'll come to that religious point in a short while. There's a question on Facebook I want to put to Dr. Adil, if that's possible. There's Abid Hussein who's saying there's several drugs like malaria drugs containing chloroquine already used in USA to treat this in 5 days. Why aren't we using this? And also, I want to ask, is there a difference between the strategies used by different countries, and should we be, using different methods on this as well?
Well, thank you, Mr. Hussain, for your question. Hydroxychloroquine is a very widely used drug, and we do have a lot of experience with that drug. And actually, the recovery trial has taken in all those drugs that are already licensed, so that if we do get good data, we can implement it very quickly. The initial trials are promising. The initial study was in France, but the N numbers were very small, so that wasn't, the international community was not able to buy that very quickly. Now, in America and in England, there are two very large-scale trials which have started, but as soon as the data becomes viable, clinically viable, then we will move towards giving patients this. However, we already have started giving patients hydroxychloroquine, but it's based on the trial. And the way that you end up getting hydroxychloroquine is a randomization process. So patients who are being treated, their details, if they consent, or if they're unwell enough, the clinician consents for them, is inserted into a central database, and that can direct what treatment they'll be allocated to. But we are using it now already on some patients.
And apart from actually medicinal benefits or medicine that we use in this process, is there, for example, ways that we can boost our own immune systems? Is there anything that we can do to boost them? Is it drinking orange juice in the morning? Is it, black seed? Is it honey? What is it that we do to better protect ourselves?
Well, there's a lot of things we can do, just as we would to look after our health. And I think as a community, we've neglected our physical health grossly, and the scholars would argue our metaphysical health as well. But staying well hydrated. Dehydration can give you a sore throat anyway, and a ticklish throat just in general. So good hydration, good vitamin C, a good diet, and exercising in the confines of your own home or a very local walk, as per the current guidance, is something that I would advocate. So whatever you can do that helps you with your immune system, I would do.
And coming to you, Mr. Saab, you can mention what you were planning to, but an additional question is, we've never been in these kinds of times. We haven't been at a time where we've been able to get this halwat, we've been able to get this seclusion, and it was playing on many people's minds what to do in these conditions. Is there anything from a religious perspective that we should be implementing in our lives? Is this a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are receiving, and how do we come out of this seeking the mercy of Almighty Allah?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First of all, I just wanted to complete what I said earlier. I said that there are those who take it, the equipment for their use, to give ghusl to dead body, and they don't allow it to reach those who are fighting on front line. They will be sinful. The point I'm making is because of the very clear situation difference. This person's situation is, if he doesn't do anything about it, he won't be sinful. He has an option to do it or not to do it. But those fighting on the front line, they don't have an option. They have to do it. So when they don't have an option, so their right gets precedence, because their right of life is at risk. Our life is not at risk. So it's like not considering the risk of life of a person, and that is a sinful thing in my mind. So that was the reason I said that I'm clear that this person will be sinful. Secondly, you asked that there are a lot of people who say this is punishment or this is this or that. Holy Prophet ﷺ in some of his hadiths mentioned plague. Plague is, we use the word ta'un for that. That used to be one of the contagious diseases, and it used to spread in communities very fast. So in those situations, Holy Prophet ﷺ actually mentioned in one of his hadiths that it is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time, it is a test for those who believe. Now, I have an understanding on this. I'm just sharing that understanding. If we want to see if it is a punishment for this person or punishment, because punishment means it is punishment for sinful people. So if person gets any hard times, and those hard times don't bring him back to Allah, don't bring him back to tawbah from all types of sins, against humanity, against his fellow people, against his own soul, all kind of. If he doesn't make tawbah from that, and then that is, and he doesn't come back to Allah, then it means that Allah is angry with him.
Subhanallah.
A'udhu min dhalik. And if a hard times come and they mold him back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he comes with tawbah, he makes a lot of tawbah, and he gives up sins if he is committing them, and he makes himself clearer and purer, then it is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is to make him better. So if we want to check ourselves, that's what I have. That's my understanding on the matter. I don't give a verdict on that, but that is my understanding of the matter. Yes, for non-believers, it is definitely a form, because it does not allow to live for tawbah. So in that way, it is definitely a form of punishment. Na'udhu min dhalik. For those who believe, it could be, it could not be. It could be just a test.
Go across the path.
Now the last thing, sorry.
If everybody can do that last 30 seconds.
Yes. Last thing I was going to say, what one should do. I think for this, number one, we don't have enough time. Number two, Sayyidi Shaykh Islam is starting on Monday. What to do in this seclusion. So it will be a regular session, a number of regular sessions to give a good guidelines. I request all the listeners and viewers to wait for that and follow it.
Just to reiterate that point, because obviously we're in social isolation to try and avoid the transmission and deal with the pandemic, but also social isolation brings its own problems for people in terms of becoming depressed, and the economy, the situation with jobs insecurity and redundancies and financial consequences, that brings its own problems. There's been a massive increase in domestic violence, for example, because of the husbands and wives being in close proximity, and that's a major issue, and that needs to be dealt with. And I have just to follow up on Mufti Sahel's recommendation. Shaykh al-Islam will be covering these topics on how to deal with these situations, with the frustration that might come about through social distancing, the isolation that might come about, to inshallah make it more productive, and actually, so we can, rather than kind of make it, so we can actually get some benefit from it rather than it becoming a major difficulty.
And Dr. Adil, your closing statement, if so?
Very briefly, I would say thank you for hosting us today. I think Shaykh al-Islam and Idara Minhaj al-Quran International has prepared millions of people across the globe how to deal with seclusion, so we're very blessed in that sense. I would just say a lateral point, that everybody out there should recognize how lucky we are to be a part of this nation where in 9 days the Excel has been converted into the NHS Nightingale, which is now the biggest critical care unit in the entire world. We're incredibly blessed, and I hope that everybody out there stays safe, look after one another, and the NHS is there for you. And I hope that everybody stays safe, and those who are currently having this disease, may Allah give you mukammal shifa, inshallah.
And that's all we've got time for today's session. There are many other areas, financial, mental, social, and other areas that have to be covered, but we couldn't cover in today's session. We pray for all those who are working on the front line. We ask those who are... Musab, you want to come in, sorry?
I just wanted you to allow me to complete that hadith. It's a very small one. If you have a few moments.
Feel free.
Holy Prophet, this is in Sahih Bukhari, as Aisha Siddiqa anha mentions that. She narrates that the Holy Prophet said, Allah is a punishment from Allah. Adawun yab'athuhu Allahu ala man yasha. Allah sends it to whoever He wants. It doesn't say to non-believers, whoever He wants. And one Allah ja'alahu rahmatan. Allah has made it rahmat for the believers. And there is not a single person that the epidemic like this comes and he isolates himself into his town, and in some narration into his houses, and accept that with the faith that only what Allah wants will come to him, except that if he dies, Allah will give him the reward of a shaheed.
Ameen, ameen. And that's all we have time for today. As mentioned, Sayyidi Shaykh al-Islam will be giving his lectures from Monday to help with seclusion. My personal opinion is that this is pandemic, when it comes to an academic and an Islamic perspective, there are many people who don't understand the vastness of this, and it's much like the terrorism aspects and extremism, that people need to be led by those who have deep understanding of Islamic theology, Islamic jurisprudence, and those that can guide us on the values and principles taught within our deen. We pray for all those who are working on the front line. We pray for those family members who are grieving right now. May Allah give them sabr. And for those who have lost their lives, for those Muslims, may Allah bless them, Jannah. And we pray for all of you. Stay safe, and until next time, Assalamu alaikum.